Hey guys,
Woohoo!
Welcome to the very first episode of Over the Money Fence. Yep, we've taken the back out and put money in. This podcast aims to help you take control of your finances with clarity and confidence. That's us to a T. Yes. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by investing, unsure about what's happening in the markets, or you just want to make a smarter decision with your money, right now, I promise you, you are in the right place. To be honest, today we're going to be kicking off with a big one. Where should you invest when markets feel wild and you're feeling scared? And let me tell you, there's a lot of people feeling that right now. So without any further ado, over to Nickers, because she's going to talk about Mr. Roger Montgomery.
Well, absolutely. I think you might remember if you tuned into our 100th episode, Roger Montgomery was the star of that. He's the founder and chairman of Montgomery Management, and he's a best-selling author. He's a trusted media spokesperson. So this podcast really, it's sort of a supportive space for all our listeners here, kind of just really to empower you to take control of your finance with confidence, because that's sort of an area really, I certainly sort of kind of need. So we're really excited. What we're doing is we're going to have a finance series the start of Thursday of every month. And we're going to discuss the real issues that sometimes I'd be a bit too embarrassed to talk about, like feeling anxious about money, not even wanting to talk about money. So it's kind of sort of like, instead of like facing your fears and just going, it can be fun and to learn. And we're all about students of life. And I'm the hand up for the biggest student there. So Roger, he really brings the clarity and compassion. And with over 30 years experience, he really does. I'm certainly feeling a bit more confident already. And I want to feel in control. So I think let's step over this money fence into our future, everybody. And let's welcome Roger.
Well, thanks,
to the
guys.
Back fence. We
great.
That's an intro and a half, right?
I know. Wow. It's undeserved, but thank you.
Well, no, someone just said recently we were out and they actually referred to you as the Warren Buffett of Australia.
Yeah, well, he's the seventh richest man in the world, so I'm definitely not Warren Buffett. But
I just thought that had nothing to do with us.
I appreciate the comparison.
Seriously, I thought that's a big call. Look, let's dive right in.
Yeah.
As we all know at the moment, there's a lot happening out there with the economies around the world, whether it's Trump's tariffs, inflation, rising interest rates, wars, elections, whole month. Is that enough to start with? So for those of us not glued to the finance pages, which is me and Nicola.
And look, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are, but a lot of some just sort of like, it's like, no.
It's glazed over.
That's why
but we have to
fun.
know what exactly is happening at the moment with the liquidity markets right now.
So I think it's really important to zip up your wallet to start with. Don't do anything. We talked about this in the 100th episode. Sometimes doing nothing and taking your time is a really good thing to do. And it's worth putting things in perspective. Perhaps the most famous 4 words that have ever been spoken were, "This too will pass." And Trump will pass. There'll be another election. Now, people are arguing about whether or not he tries to stay in after 2027 and, whether there'll be a civil uprising in the United States because, he'll become a dictator. Forget about all that. It'll pass. It'll all pass. And so you really need to think beyond that. And I think what happens is most people get stuck in all the news headlines. And the best thing that you can do is just turn it off. And focus. I mean, you've got to have a strategy. We're going to talk about building a strategy, having an approach. But then once you've got that framework, you don't need to do anything else. And the stuff on the news about what's happening today and what happened overnight, and gold went up and oil went down and the stock market went up and who cares? Like, that's every day is going to be the same. Tomorrow there'll be another day. Markets close and then they reopen. It's not beneficial. It's not going to add any value. It's not going to help you do anything other than become more anxious. So just turn it off. Because the way to approach the stock market, there's probably 2 approaches. And the popular approach, and people don't even realise that they're doing it, is they treat it like betting on black or red at the roulette wheel. You know, oh, this stock went up and this thing went down, and oh, I'm richer today, I'm poorer today. But that's treating the stock market like at a venue where you would gamble. And shares of businesses just become things that wiggle on a screen, and when they go up, you're smarter, and when they go down, you're less smart. When really what you should do is just remember that shares are pieces of a business. And if you read the Australian Financial Review Rich 200 or the Australians Rich 250, all of the people that are in there have started businesses. You know, no one saved their way to being in the Rich 200.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Right? They have businesses, whatever they are. And they became wealthy by owning businesses. And the great thing about the stock market is that it democratises business ownership. It lets you own a piece of a business. Now, not today, but in the future, what we'll do is if it's of interest to people, we will get into maybe a bit of the nitty-gritty about how you identify a good business and separate a good one from a bad one, because that can make you really wealthy. But really, for today's purposes, when it comes to all the noise, we just need to turn it off for a second and ask ourselves, is it temporary or is it permanent? Because what the stock market tends to do is treat things as if it's permanent when really they're only temporary. And so instead of being influenced by the bipolar nature of the stock market, what you want to do is take advantage of it. So the market will always swing from bouts of extraordinary optimism to really, really deep depression, and it'll do it in a day. And it's easy to be influenced by that. It's easy to let that inform your decision making, when really what you should be doing is taking advantage of the bipolar nature of the market. So when it's depressed and despondent and it can see nothing but doom and gloom, that's when you want to be skipping, to the bank and getting your money out and investing it in really good quality companies or into funds that invest in good quality companies or have a great track record. And when it's optimistic and, you go to an auction, for example, think of this, actually, it's not a bad idea. Think about the stock market as an auction for a house, but not where you turn up at the property, but when you go to the offices, or they've rented out a room at the Intercontinental, and a whole bunch of houses are all going to be auctioned off on a Thursday night or a Wednesday night. You've probably been to one of those events. Anyway, if the room is empty and no one's bidding, that's when you want to buy. But if the room is packed and it's standing room only and there's a line out the door and people are, throwing money at the auctioneer, well, leave. Don't buy then. And the stock market's a lot like that. So when everyone's excited, forget about it. And when everyone's depressed, that's when you should be interested. And you mentioned earlier in your introduction, you kindly compared me to Warren Buffett. He had an amazing and very pithy phrase, and it was, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. Be greedy when others are fearful. So when everyone's scared and running for the hills and everyone can see only doom and gloom.
Oh,
yeah.
I love that.
And so when everybody's thinking the worst, that's when you should be really, really excited. And when everyone's thinking the best and they're really, really greedy and the room's full at the auction, then zip up your wallet and leave. Don't buy. Because
such good, you know what, just hearing you say that, Roger, and I think some of our listeners here, I just feel kind of really a bit more reassured.
You ground it. You just ground it.
You can't help but, you see things on the news and you hear things there, and you do get caught up in the momentum. And also, like a lot of people say, our contemporary, their money's, if you've, put automatically money in their super, and then you're actually currently too scared to look at the balance.
Yeah.
Because you just know it's not going to be positive.
Because you're reactive too.
And so but it's kind of nice if you can sort of, like when you're saying breathe, let it sort of, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
Indeed.
It's
Indeed.
essential advice.
It's in everything, isn't it? Your emotion,
But I love what he said about the bloody news. Like, we're bombarded by news these days. Whether it's your tablet, your laptop, your television, or someone's talking.
It's all
whatever.
clickbait.
I love when you just said, tune out.
Yes,
Tune out.
turn it off.
And as Nicola was just saying then, it's like it will pass.
Yeah.
Like, get over
I
yourselves.
guess it's like anything. We like to be informed, and you
yeah,
like
you
to
want
know
to,
what's going
particularly
on. But
in the world,
but getting caught up.
Yeah.
And it's just a kind of good life lesson. And, with this, Roger, because, we've had a lot of our listeners have sort of spoken to us and are just sort of saying a lot really do not just have that fear of even the current thing there, but just as sort of sometimes women, we're in that sort of our generation of, we weren't sort of like taught to speak about money so much.
Yeah,
or a lot of our, friends
Well, it's
or
taboo.
contemporary now
It was,
getting
yeah.
divorced, they're in these situations, and we did a little survey and just sort of saying for the ones who have split or the ones who, have sort of separated, do you feel more financially, how do you feel sort of like at the end of that? And most said that they actually felt worse off and they're starting again. But I've got to say, and I just want to sort of read this out from one of our listeners too who wrote in. She said, we're asking all this question. She said, I chose to buy my ex out and now have a mortgage at 60. But now I'm the happiest I've been in many years, even if financially I'm back to starting again at 60. So what sort of advice, because, we're not all like Sue Bell. We love that. If you tune into her, she's great. We had a bit of a joke that Sue Bell sort of like, her first husband, she had a nice little divorce and she said it was an early retirement. She was a very wealthy Texan. But we're not all like Sue Bell. What do you suggest or say to so many of the women like this?
Well, you can't, look... People come to financial advisors for, a magic ticket, a golden ticket. How can you help me? The reality is that you need some money, and so how are you going to generate that money? And if, for example, my mother-in-law, she I think she likes to be generous and she likes to share and she likes to buy things for people, but she doesn't really have the money to do that. And so, but she hasn't realised that, she wants to be the generous, loving grandmother, and she is. That's her nature. But she can't afford to be as generous as she wants. She wants to go to the local butcher, not to the supermarket. Their prices are higher. She doesn't bring a cheap bottle of wine when she comes over. She buys.
Sounds like me.
She buys a really. And there's no golden ticket. There's no magic bullet to give her that money unless she goes out and does something to generate it. So there's no cure-all. You have to live within your means. I like the idea of paying yourself first. So it doesn't matter what age you are, but a lot of people, what they do is they tend to spend all their money and then have a look at what they've got left over for themselves, right? So you receive a pay packet or you get paid out or you get a settlement or whatever it is, and then or people win lotto. I used to work at an institution where we advised people who were lotto winners.
Wow.
And the advice that we gave them, and I'll come back to this in just a sec, but the advice that we gave to them was do nothing for 12 months. Just get used to having it and looking at it and realising that it's yours, and just put it away somewhere where it earns some interest, and feel free to spend the interest. Remember, you're going to pay tax on that, so don't spend all of it. And in some cases, the earnings put people immediately into the top tax bracket from those winnings, the earnings on the winnings. But the thing was that at the end of it, so they wrote up a list of everything they wanted to buy. It was a boat called the Pink Lady, and they wanted to get a barbecue, and they wanted to get a house, and they wanted to pay off their family's debts and all this sort of stuff. And they're all great things to do. But then at the end of that process, you realise, I haven't left much for me. So instead, you want to flip it. And by the way, with the lotto winners, at the end of the 12 months, typically what happened is they had their list of things that they wanted to buy. They didn't end up buying many of those things.
How interesting.
Because they wanted to preserve that amount of money that was generating all that income for them. And then, so paying yourself first is a really, really good thing to remember to do. So irrespective...
Can you break that down, paying yourself first?
Yeah. So let's say you receive... You've got a job, you're getting paid fortnightly, and let's say it was, I don't know, $10,000, whatever it is, doesn't matter what the amount is. So what you do is you say to yourself, right, I'm going to keep 10% of that for me, and I'm going to put that in an account that I just have less access to, and I don't have a debit card attached to it. I cut that up and threw that in the bin. Yeah. And that's my, if you like, my wealthing account. I'm building up some wealth, and I'm going to do some investing with that money down the track. But at the moment, and then once you've paid yourself, you look at what's left over. There's 90% left over. That's for your bills. That's for going out. That's for all the other things, the entertaining and whatever, gifts and whatever, holidays. But you've already paid yourself. So flip what you typically do. So normally people pay everyone else.
Yes.
And then what they've got left is theirs, and there's usually not much left.
I love hearing that. It's a bit
logical.
Like sort of put your own oxygen
it's very much
first,
very
it?
much
Before
so,
you help.
And so I think
it's
that's
so
the whole
true.
thing too. We'll get back to sort of what was saying, like with the listener there, that she's the happiest she's been in many ways, but she's starting from scratch, and sometimes we all can start from scratch, and it's never too late, is it?
Where does she start?
And you do need an income coming in.
Well, there's a lot of information that's not there. We don't know how she was approved for a mortgage by a bank, presumably, or a non-bank lender, and so they have decided, well, she's fit to pay this mortgage off, so she's able to do that, but she hasn't said to you where that money's coming from or how much extra there is after the mortgage is paid. So it's very hard in those situations to give advice, but I'm pleased that she's happy, and it sounds like she's content, which is the most important thing, and she's investing in herself, which is really, really great. We don't know what is around the corner. We never know what's coming, and so it's really important to do things that make us content now, or that help us become content now.
To say,
but also, I think at the end of the day, and you and I talk about this a lot too, it's also grounding that you make better decisions ultimately, don't you?
Yeah.
Like we were just chatting about someone having coffee, Rog, about certain people that are living in their head of negativity.
Yes.
They don't ground it, so therefore those decisions are all like a river flow. It's coming and going.
Yes.
Where, when you say, I love that word content. If you can,
I think it's more important than happiness.
Yeah, interesting.
I think contentment is something we should be aiming for. Everyone says, let's aim for happiness. If your kids are happy, that's great. Well, actually, inevitably something bad's going to happen. And if their happiness was tied to things being good, then they're not going to be happy again. But if they can be content in a variety of circumstances, good and bad, if they can find contentment, then that really should be the goal. And it sounds like the listener who wrote in, she's found that place of contentment.
It is, and I think that's just a sort of
it's
a good
amazing
thing to bring up, because money is so important. But I think that's sort of also sort of like the mindset of it, and it's kind of the balance. And money really used to be a thing, like we're saying, we didn't talk about it. It's cool to talk about money.
It was rude.
Now. It's also
wash your mouth, that was so.
But I like hearing things sort of like saying even live within your means, because now it's a time, there's no shame in that. There's no sort of, I think that's just a really smart thing to do. It's like it's a fitness, it's a whole sort of like mind, body, spirit, soul, which we're all about. And it's just I guess it's an energy, it's an important thing that we just sort of need to sort of like know how to use and learn.
We can abuse it too. So so there's lots of studies that demonstrate that if you show off your wealth, if you tend to attract the wrong sort of friends, you tend to lose the quality friends, and you tend to attract less quality friends. If you show that off. So you can alienate people by flaunting your wealth. That's really important. We have to admit that, people say, oh, money doesn't bring you happiness. What it does, though, is it brings convenience.
It pays the bills.
And convenience can make life a lot easier, and that's just a fact.
And choices, don't you?
Yeah, it gives you options. Exactly. And so, look, I think there are people who use money to feed insecurities, and really you would be a better steward of money if you dealt with your insecurities first. Deal with that first, and then you'll be a much better steward with your money. You can waste a lot of money just feeding the various ailments that we have, mentally and emotionally. And so it's really important that we realise that money can be a really great tool, and we can do lots of wonderful things with it. We can help others with it. We can help ourselves with it. We can do lots of fun stuff. But how we advertise that and how we choose to, that really does also expose our nature.
Or you could be a tool with money, huh?
Well, someone once said. Someone once
There's
said.
a lot of those.
I hope you don't mind me saying that.
Who ironically,
and we know a few.
are not content.
Yeah.
A lot aren't.
What do they
they're not
say?
content
There's a line of a guy in a super yacht in Europe, and everyone's going, "Oh my God, the sunset! He doesn't see it. He doesn't get it." You know, the beauty of what is around him. You know, it's like everyone else saw it but him.
Yeah.
He's more money, more boats, more this, more that. What are you doing with that? You know, get the tender.
I went to a wedding once.
That's what we're all about, really, isn't it? It's all just sort of like,
you and I, champagne and a sunset. That's all.
I went to a wedding once, and
and
the reception was at Blackwattle Bay, at the Super Yacht Marina.
Yeah, gorgeous.
And the minister who had married the couple. I caught up with him at the reception. He was invited to the reception, which was lovely, by the way. And he and I went for a stroll along the marina, and we were looking at all the boats. And you know, they're gorgeous, gorgeous bit of machinery, you know, beautiful. And you sort of think, oh, how nice would it be to spend a week or a month or whatever on these? He said to me, Roger, I've attended to lots of people on their deathbeds, and I give you my 100% guarantee that if they could be given an extra day or an extra 2 days or an extra 3 days, they would give the boats away. It meant nothing. What matters more is time, you know, and quality time. So we, you know, it's great for advertising how successful we've been. It's great for all of that stuff, which a lot of it's driven by, you know, insecurity, and we want approval from others. But really, none of it matters. What matters is relationships. And if you can use your money, to help relationships, if you can use your money, then that's great. And I'm glad you've got it. And you should.
No. So, hey guys, we told you, Roger. He's the. I mean, we're talking finance, and we're almost tearing up.
I know, but you know what?
Only
not
Roger.
my intention, by
What
the
do
way.
we say now again? Roger that.
Exactly.
Roger that. Look, you know, I want to flip the switch here.
Yeah.
Somebody that has woken up this morning and they're panicked and they're anxious.
Yes.
And they're levitating. And they've seen, oh God, it's dropped again, the stock market, and or you know they're looking at the election and the possible inflation and whatever.
Yes.
In their mind, they're going, oh God, then I need to put all this cash in under my mattress. No, I've got to buy gold. Gold's safe. Oh no, maybe I've got to buy shares because they're low. What do you say to someone that is in that quagmire?
So stop.
Yeah.
Don't
breathe.
Don't do anything.
Right.
And ask yourself
stop.
what was your strategy to begin with? Why did you invest in these things to start with? What was the message you were given? Who told you to do that? Ring them, by the way. They got you into it. So find out, unless they've left, you know,
Right.
and then you'll have to get some independent advice. But really, there'll have been a strategy put in place in that situation that you've articulated. There'll have been a strategy or some purpose to those investments, and they will continue to serve that purpose over time. It's just that in the interim, and you know, we're going to have the opportunity to talk about investments where there's no volatility or there's very little volatility. There are alternatives to the stock market. But for now, the question is, what do you do about that? Well, you don't have to do very much at all, because the market's always going to be volatile. The world is always going to be uncertain.
Living off returns, and the returns aren't there anymore.
Or what if they're not?
You know,
What if
like,
they're not in the share market and don't have gold, and they're thinking they don't have those,
Yes.
but they're thinking cash under the mattress?
So that's a really bad strategy.
In this volatile times, what would you suggest? Is my question.
Well, look, I mentioned earlier that a really great thing to remember is, you know, the higher the price you pay, the lower your return.
Yeah.
Right? So the reverse is also true. The lower the price you pay, the higher your return. So when the chicken's head has been cut off and it's running around headless,
Yes, that's a
like
great
everybody,
analogy.
like
yeah.
everybody is,
Yeah.
That's when you really want to get some money out from under the bed and be investing in it.
Okay. So get it out and invest it because things have dropped.
Yeah, now that's a
But
blanket statement.
But gold's rising. Gold's
Gold's been going up
the roof, yeah.
for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
It's now at record highs, both in US dollars and in Australian dollars.
Would you recommend people investing in gold?
I don't know where gold's going to go, and there's not much you can. No, I own some physical gold, but I can't. It was interesting, when some time ago when I showed my daughter, a piece of gold, she looked at it and she was surprised at how heavy it was, and then she said, "Okay, Dad, and what do you do with this?" And I said, "Well, you can look at it and you can polish it, and there's really not much else that it's good for." And she said, "So is it an asset?" And she's only 15.
Wow,
Good girl. Great question.
She asked, "Is it an asset?" And I said, "Well, not in the sense it's not an asset that produces an income." And she said, "So then,
that's good. Yeah.
so then, what does it do? Wouldn't it be better that you bought something else that produces an income?" And she thinks she's creative and not very good at money, but
good.
she's got straight to the germ of
Make it into
the issue.
can't you?
So, it's great to look at. Charlie Munger is a famous billionaire investor in the United States who's now passed away, and he worked with Warren Buffett. And he said, "Well, gold's useless. All you can do is look at
a
it.
few good things you can do.
All you can do is
with
look
it.
at it and fondle it, and that's about it. But it doesn't produce an income.
So it's trading.
So if you have an ounce of gold today, at the end of eternity, you'll have an ounce of gold. Nothing's changed. Now, people say, yes, but the price might go up. Well, gold is a bet on fear. Gold is a bet on other people being scared, right? So you buy gold when you think everyone's going to get scared.
God, Roger, you're the man of words.
You are the man. I've never ever heard
That's
that.
really fascinating.
Well, so people talk about, and we don't want to get too technical, but people talk about monetary debasement and fiat currencies collapsing and all this stuff, and that's why they want old gold.
Yeah.
Well, that's another fear. You're just scared that money, fiat money or cash money, US dollars, Australian dollars, they're all going to collapse. That's a fear. So gold is a bet on fear. It doesn't change. It's nothing else. It's a bet on fear. And so the Chinese are buying a lot of gold at the moment. They're buying a lot of gold. They're not buying as many US bonds. And, there's a fear that they're preparing for war. There's a fear that they're going to try and strengthen their currency in an armed conflict or whatever, or a trade war or whatever it is. So gold is just a bet on fear. And the reason it's been going up is because more people have been betting on fear and more people are getting scared. Now, what tends to happen is something called FOMO, and the fear of missing out. And so once things go up a lot, people then jump on board because they're worried.
Isn't it joy of missing out?
That's brilliant. Love that.
FOMO's the fear of missing out. And so people believe it or not, people buy stuff for no other reason than it's been going up. Now, that's precisely what I was talking about earlier. You're now gambling on the red. You're at the roulette wheel betting on red. You're saying it's going to go up and not betting. You're betting it against it going down. So you're now speculating. You're not investing. You're gambling. And there's a big difference between speculating or gambling and investing. And so for the person...
define that, because, I've shares and that makes sense what you're saying. Like speculating scary, investing sounds solid.
So let me give you two, I'll contrast them.
Yeah.
So you're in a cab.
Yep.
And the cab driver says, "Oh, you should buy Vulcan Energy." Why? "Oh, it's been going up. It's got this, got that, the other." You get on the phone straight away, or you get onto your app and you buy Vulcan Energy. You haven't done any research. Somebody told you to buy it. You bought it.
How often does that happen?
Oh, so often.
You got a tip from somebody.
A tip from someone, right?
Yep.
At the barbecue or whatever.
Absolutely. After too many beers, I'm going to buy that one. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm nervous about how well you did that.
Don't stand next to me at a barbie, Rog.
Don't like it.
Anyway.
No, I said beers.
Yeah, so
I'm with the boys by the barbie with the beers,
And so that's gambling. That's speculating. You're just taking a punt. You haven't done any research. You haven't looked. By the way, how many people say, "Oh, look, I've researched this"?
Oh,
no, you haven't. You've just read an article.
Yes.
Or you watched a TikTok video.
Yeah, I was about to say, it came up on Instagram.
You didn't even read an article.
Oh, I've got to believe
and
that.
And people call that research.
True.
It's not research.
True.
They didn't go to the source document, even if,
So honestly, what do you do? Because not everybody,
Well, you're not going to do it yourself.
No.
We're not going to talk to people at this podcast about investigating
Not
and
at
researching
all.
companies.
Yeah.
God,
You know,
no,
that-
but you go to the right people that can guide you.
And
That's
Indeed.
therein is the secret.
And
Yes.
it's trust.
It's
sort of
correct.
this
You know what?
real
That's
thing.
it. That's it in essence.
Absolutely trust,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's a big deal in your life. Whether you've got a small amount of money or a large amount of money,
true.
it's kind of irrelevant. If you're going to sort of put that in,
We spent months finding you, by the way.
Want the advice?
as far as trust
hang on a
goes.
sec, can we-
What else can you do apart from shares? I mean, I don't really know.
He just
Well,
said
there's a
it's-
lot, but I just want to finish answering the question
yeah,
about
please.
investing versus speculating.
Yes.
Yeah.
So investing is understanding something about companies and how they create wealth. So the way a business becomes more valuable is actually really easy to understand. And if you're thinking of starting a business, it's really important that you know this. If you own a business, you'll be a better investor, and if you're an investor, you'll be better at business as well. So that really helps. They complement each other.
Good tip,
So,
isn't it?
so a business generates wealth or increases in value by generating a return on the money that's been put in and left in that business. So when you kick a business off, you inject some money. Now you're going to do some things with that money. You might go and buy some inventory. You might use it to create something new that you're going to sell, or you might set up an office and you're providing a service. That money that you've put in is called the equity. That's the shareholders' equity. That's what you've put into the business. That's the money you've contributed. And then next year, at the end of a year, if you've made a profit, you might decide to pay that out to yourself as a dividend, or you might decide to leave it in the business and buy more inventory or expand the office or do something with the money to make your business bigger. That's what you've left in the business. That's the retained earnings. So the combination of what you put in and what you've left in is called equity. And a business creates wealth or becomes more valuable by adding to that pile every year, by increasing the equity and generating a high return on that equity. And there's something in finance that we call return on equity or return on invested capital. You don't need to worry about that. But the best businesses, the businesses that generate the most wealth over time, are the businesses that can generate the highest return on the amount of equity you've put into the business. So if, for example, you've invested $1 million and at the end of the year you make $100,000 profit, that's a 10% return on your equity. But if you generated $1 million at the end of the year, well, that's 100% return on equity. And guess what? Everyone wants to own that business.
Yes.
That generates the 100% return on equity, and everybody in business wants to compete with that business because they generated 100% return on the money, and they want to get that too. So the business that gets the really high return starts to attract competition. Now, if you can find a business that's been in business for 20 or 30 years and it's generating these really high returns, well, that's miraculous, because it would have had competitors along the way, but somehow they've not been able to compete, and it's still generating these really high returns. So it has something called a competitive advantage, because it's doing something that no one else can do.
Obviously, yeah.
It's doing
Stands alone.
So think about a Westfield.
Yes.
Right? Very hard to compete with a Westfield shopping centre because they dominate the geographic area, right? Think about this. There's a company called REA Group, which owns realestate.com.au. And I'm sure, it's socially acceptable pornography, right? Isn't it? You can spend hours looking at other people's houses.
I do like that, don't
and
you?
no one's
I love looking at this.
I've never heard.
And gardens.
no one's going to criticise you for looking at other people's houses,
it's
right?
True. It's like a lolly shop.
Yeah.
Nice.
And anyway, so that website, that company charges the most for people to advertise their homes for sale on it. And yet customers still cross the road to advertise on that website, not on the one that offers you your house for sale for free. So there might be 70, 80 websites in Australia where you can list your house for sale and it costs you nothing. But people will still pay the most to get their house on that website. Why? Because they have the most people looking for houses.
Yeah.
And the reason they have the most people looking is because they've got the most houses. The reason why they've got the most houses is got the most people looking. And that's called
Isn't that okay? I so get what you're where you led
and
with
that's
that.
called the network effect.
Wow.
So back to my point about companies creating value or becoming more valuable, the ones that have something special that they've protected and other people can't compete, and the most valuable competitive advantage of all is the ability to charge a higher price for your product without ruining your sales. Your sales keep going up even though you keep charging more. That's the best business to own, and that's how businesses create wealth, by adding a lot to their equity every year. They generate the highest return and they can keep a large portion of it. And it keeps going up.
Can, at the end of the year.
And you asked me earlier what's the difference between speculating and investing.
Yeah.
So investing is knowing that.
Yes.
And then owning those businesses when Trump does something stupid or unpredicted.
Yeah.
And then the share price of that really, really good business goes down, not because they're doing anything wrong.
No.
It's just because something else is happening out there in the world. And that's the thing with the stock market. It's bipolar. It goes up and down, and that has sometimes nothing to do with what the underlying business is doing. And investing in that business when Trump has done something unstable, push the share price down, and then what you do is you just hang on to it for the next 10 years, and you don't have to worry about it.
It's safe ultimately.
Well, as long as it keeps doing that thing,
of course,
then you're going to be fine, and you'll do
really
really well.
Speculative is obviously not like something's not out of the ground yet, or
speculate. So speculating is doing something when you don't really know anything about what it is that you're doing.
The thing you're doing when you don't know what you're doing.
That's right.
It's the Clayton's
that's pretty much gambling
maneuver.
That's
right. That's interesting.
Gambling. You're just taking
umbrella.
a punt. You're just betting on something because someone told you.
At the Barbie, that's a speculation.
And by the way, if they told you something that they shouldn't have told you, and you go and buy it, that's
they
illegal.
Blame you. No, but they also
but that's
blame
also
you.
illegal.
Some people do give you sort of like a bit of that.
No, they do.
Yeah, that's insider trading.
Is that true?
You kind of got to be careful with things like that.
If you're at a barbecue,
not if they saw it on the Insta. You talk if someone in that.
If
business,
they are working in that business and they
different.
shared something with you,
I get it.
You should tell them. You should say,
throw
"Thank
the
you,
sausage at them."
Thank you very much. Maybe you need another drink, but don't talk about that. Let's just get you to stop talking.
I've never heard of businesses and that explained in that way, and honestly, it kind of really makes sense. It's just absolutely fascinating. I didn't realise money in business could be so interesting.
And
I really didn't.
No,
you know,
it is
like
true.
It's, wow, I just want to know more and more.
So how can you invest in these businesses? Well, number one, you could do it yourself. This is answering your question about where to invest.
What do you do?
So you can buy a business. You could buy realestate.com.au. You could also buy an index fund that just tracks the biggest 200 companies in Australia, or the biggest 100, or the biggest 50, or the smallest companies. You know, you can follow an index, and then you really don't have to worry about individual companies at all. You're owning all of those good companies, but you're also owning some of the bad ones. And then what you can also do is and they're called passive funds. They're just tracking the market. But then what you can also do is you can invest in an active fund. So that's where there's somebody who's professionally deciding to invest in realestate.com.au today, but not BHP. Or they're going to buy the Commonwealth Bank, but they're not going to buy the NAB. You know, they're picking stocks. They're investing in individual companies on your behalf. And the great thing about investing in those active managers is you can see how good they've been. You know, you can go onto their websites, you can look at their performance, and you can see how well they've done. But what you don't do is look at the starting point and the end point and say, wow, they've beaten the market since inception. What you want to do is, how have they done in the bad times? You know, how have they gone when have they done better or worse than the market? And then you can invest in things that don't invest in the stock market at all. So you could invest in private credit, for example.
I was going to ask about that.
I don't really know.
Can you
I've
break?
heard of it, but I don't really know how it
we'll
works.
go into private credit, I think, more as we go. But can you just
very
describe
briefly
what that is?
So you're not. So remember earlier I gave you that example of when you start a business, you inject some money into that business, your own money, or some friends and family put money in that business. That's equity. That's ownership. Now, in the event that the business wound up, let's say the business failed, then the last people to be paid are the equity owners. everyone else, the staff get paid first, the creditors get paid first, the secured creditors are paid first, then the unsecured creditors, and then you get whatever's left over. That's the equity in the business. But private credit doesn't contribute equity to businesses. It lends money to businesses, either secured or unsecured. And there's different funds, like there's different stocks on the stock market, there are different private credit funds doing different things. Now, in the press, there's been a lot of bad press about private credit funds because there are a lot of private credit funds that lend to property developers. And, if you're living in Sydney and around Sydney and Melbourne,
Absolutely.
there's been a lot of projects that have collapsed because, the builders have...
We've all heard about those.
they've signed up.
Suffered it themselves.
Yeah.
They've signed up to a fixed price contract and then they've run out of money and they go under. They put themselves into administration or liquidation and they can't complete the job. And so the lenders then take that unfinished property as security and they either have to sell it or they have to try and finish the project, get another builder in to finish the project. And that's what's been in the press about private credit lately. A lot of these funds that are lending to property developers. But then there are other private credit funds that don't lend to property developers.
I imagine majority these days are not lending to
Well, actually, the majority do.
Even now.
I'm
shocked.
Yeah, a lot of them do. Well,
it's not even so much bad press, it's the truth.
Well, the attractiveness has been the returns that have been on offer. So some of these funds have been offering 10, 11, 12% returns per year with none of the because you're not buying stocks, you're not buying shares.
Right.
There's none of the volatility of the stock market. So that's really attractive, particularly if you know
appealing, isn't
if
it?
you know nothing about the stock market and it's all too scary and you don't like the volatility and you've just separated or you've just your partner's passed and you're there and you're now needing to make decisions about the stock market. And if you're not qualified to do that, well, that doesn't appeal.
The first time in your life, a lot of people are in that situation.
It's very true,
Yeah.
and they're quite naive. But so some have moved away from development. What other things do private credit
So there are
invest
private
in?
credit funds that lend to medium-sized corporates or businesses, and they're providing. They're not turnarounds. These aren't businesses that are on their knees and need money to rescue them. They're lending to businesses that are growing. So
I love that. So money to grow further. I love that.
That's right. Yeah. And the business owner will be saying,
good energy.
From the business's perspective, they'll be saying, the business owner will be saying, well, I don't want to sell shares in my business. This business is going really well. I don't want to share the ownership of it with anyone else. I want to keep 100% ownership of the business. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to borrow a bit of money to get that extra stock, or to, pay out. For example, I'm going to borrow some money to expand my business, to buy a new factory or whatever it is that they're doing.
Oh, I love business so much.
See, this actually that entices me as a safer investment to me. Because I don't feel fearful with that.
You've always had a thing with shares too.
I get the volatility.
Yes.
But if you'd
as you're
asked me,
saying, I ride it, and I'm like, oh my God. Well, this
15 years
feels
ago,
very reassuring.
15 years ago, though, your response should have been very different to that, because if I'd said to you before the global financial crisis, if I'd said to you, I'm going to be lending money to a small or medium-sized corporate in Australia, you should have said, well, you've got rocks in your head, Rog, because the banks have tied up that whole market.
Right.
The banks do all of that lending. If you had the opportunity to lend money to a business, that business probably didn't qualify for a bank loan.
Right.
So it wasn't a good quality business. And now you might be asking, well, what's changed since then?
Yeah.
Well, the global financial crisis hit.
Yep.
And so regulators like the Reserve Bank of Australia and APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, they imposed restrictions on the sorts of lending that the banks can do, or if they did lend, they would have to have lots more capital for that kind of loan. And so the banks have just said, well, it's not profitable for us to do that. We don't want to do that kind of lending, so we're not going to. And what's happened since the global financial crisis is this big gap has opened up between what businesses in Australia would like to borrow and what the big banks are willing to lend. So they're still high quality businesses. The banks just don't want any of that action. And so now non-bank lenders have emerged and private credit funds have emerged to try and fill that gap or to start filling that gap. And we've really only just scratched the surface. 91% of lending in Australia is still conducted by the banks. Only 9%.
Actually, that astounds me.
It's so interesting because it used to always be the way you'd have to sort of like, the bank manager have his tie on.
Oh,
have
yeah.
to sort of like,
and he'd say, hello, Nicola, would you like a cup of tea?
To see when you could get
and a bicky.
Exactly, to see your bank manager.
And my grandmother made the bicky.
And I didn't know that there was any other way.
Now there are non-bank lenders doing, for businesses that need capital, there are non-bank lenders who can lend that money. Yeah. They can often approve it much quicker, because what they'll do is they've got great software and great technology that allows them to approve the loans much faster. And then they're connected to the business through Xero or one of the accounting software apps. So these non-bank lenders, they can see how the business is going day to day.
Wow.
Week to week. They can see exactly what's going on.
Do this, and it's really paid off.
And so some of these funds now are lending to, and we'll talk more about this in a future episode.
We'll break it down even more. Look, while we're there, can I just quickly throw in term deposits? What is that?
Well, a term deposit is...
Look at me.
Okay. So you might not know this, but when you deposit money in a bank, when you deposit money in a bank, you are lending your money to the bank. Mm-hmm. You are the lender, they are the borrower. Yeah. So deposits are a liability for the bank. They've got to pay you that. They've got to pay that back to you. Now, the thing is, it's a very secure form of lending. Mm-hmm. Because it's so secure, the banks don't pay you very much.
Right.
You can't get back early, can you?
And they can't offer you a very high return.
You're locked in
for a year, and all
actually, you're right.
Well, that's the difference between a bank deposit and a term deposit. So a bank account, you could take that money. You've got flexibility to take that money out whenever you want.
Yeah.
So the banks can't commit that money to a long-term investment.
So term is like it's a 5-year.
So a term deposit might be,
or whatever.
No, it could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months.
Yeah,
but then
decide.
You commit to lending your money to the bank for that term, and the bank commits to a higher rate of return for you because they've got the money secured and they can go and invest it elsewhere and try and make a margin on your money.
So it's safe, but would you recommend
the safest
to clients,
banks, Australian banks, you shouldn't ever have to worry about having your money on deposit with an Australian bank. There's a government guarantee for below a certain amount. I think it's $200,000 or $250,000. But banks are rock solid in Australia, and that was the result of the global financial crisis and a number of inquiries where it was determined that banks should be absolutely, unquestionably strong. And so we don't ever have to worry about our Australian banks. That's my view. So what we're talking about with private credit is not that. Right?
No,
it is
absolutely not.
It is a different risk profile, but then some of the, and we'll talk a bit more about this in a future episode, but some of these private credit funds, their portfolio of loans are independently rated AA. Or AA rated, so very high quality.
Because you want to, Roger, people just obviously want to feel very secure, and that it's
you don't want to lose your money.
No, because I think a lot of people have felt safe with banks because it was sort of like the old school sort of way of doing it, and private credit for sort of some people there still might sort of think it's a bit newer, but I think it's great to hear sort of like how it works and why it works, and it just now makes it so much more. It's clearer, and it's less.
I feel less anxious.
I know.
Funny.
I
feel really safe when you were talking.
Because I honestly thank you for explaining this.
Yeah, because I didn't understand.
I honestly didn't know all this.
Yeah. Well, look, great. And there's so many more things, and when we get some more time, we'll talk about some other things. But for today, it's just really important to understand. As I said in the 100th episode, you don't need to rush. Yeah. Sometimes the very best strategy is doing nothing at all.
Yeah. Big breath.
Well, that's so good. Well, guys, you don't have to rush, because we're going to also, you can hear Roger will be coming in our ears every month too, which is just fantastic.
And also, look, we did get quite a few people writing in, but we thought that one was relative today. Yeah. Please write in with your questions. Roger's going to be here once a month.
The chats
absolutely.
To see what's on in your mind, because it's just been sort of great there.
What's one small step that someone could take today to feel more in control?
Understand where everything is and what it's doing.
So go through. Do we have to do a budget, Roger?
You don't. Well, this is not about a budget.
Budgets.
Budgets are about spending and earning. Saving, earning, and spending, and wealthing. And I talked about that earlier. Budgets help with that. But what we're talking about is, getting all of your investments down on a piece of paper. And I'm sure most people will have that. And if not, they need to find out where all your money is. And here's a challenge until next month.
Okay.
What return has it been generating for you? A lot of people in Australia don't even know what return they're getting on the investments that they have. So my challenge to people is, if you've got some investments,
okay, everyone,
work out
do mine.
How much, where, and what they're generating, what they're doing.
So don't glaze over. Step up to the mark.
Just do it. I can't help.
Big
no one
or
can
small,
help.
It doesn't matter. I think that's sort of like the key sort of start for people who are starting again and don't really know where to start. This is a really good tip to start.
Well, anyone
find out what you've got. Doesn't matter, big or small. It's the best first step, and you're going to lead us all the way through.
Correct.
I really want you to hold my hand and all the other listeners.
Well, a hand for Nicola, for me, less fear.
Yes.
So that's our personal.
Anyone you go and see for advice are going to want to know where everything is and what it's been doing and why it's there. So do that now.
Well, we're sort of like with wrapping it all up for this sort of one here, and we sort of love our backfence wisdom from Roger. We've sort of got a question here of what's this like a best, I don't know what you say about tip, but for living a truly rich life, money aside.
So I had an experience once where I was really worried because I'd been investing in a couple of businesses that I was growing, and I was really worried I might get to the point where I would run out and they hadn't launched yet. And I was really nervous about that. And then it occurred to me, and we were literally driving into the rear car park of a church where Kerry and I got married, and we were going to church that day. And I remember thinking, I lost everything, it's okay, because I've got family and I've got friends and and relationships. You can't take it with you. You can't take the money with you, but you do hang on to that love, and you need people around you. So that was the thing that I think really creates a
getting me emotional again. We started with the emotion, now I'm finishing with it. That was beautiful.
Money, cold, hard, calculated, this and that, and really what's more important.
So invest in relationships.
Oh my God.
Invest in relationships.
Well, we're investing in you as a relationship with finance because it's something that is vital. So, Roger, what's one truth about money you've learnt that you wish you'd known sooner?
Ooh, that's
a good one,
that's
Jodie.
a tough one.
That's a good one to wrap it up with.
Well, remember my story on the 100th episode about vomiting after I bought the camera?
So anyone who hasn't listened to that one, tune in.
No,
it's amazing.
You brought it up a few times. It's interesting. Yeah. The camera.
It's important not to define yourself by money.
Yeah. It's interesting how that dilutes down every time with you. It's fascinating about don't define yourself, and there's more to life than money.
Yeah, you are not your money.
Well, thank you so much, Roger.
It's a pleasure.
You have just been amazing. And for all our listeners, as Di said, please write in,
I feel so
DM us.
calm.
We are going to be back in your ears next month. We've got so much more to talk about too, and so many things, even with, it's like when relationships fall over or you're starting a new relationship and, like in combining families, there's so many different things that
you
we
didn't intend to be alone in your life. But once divorce comes about, then you're like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah.
We're going to talk. We're going to break that down too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
Roger,
thank you
looking
so
forward
much.
to being part of it.
Yes, seriously,
thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to it, guys. Ciao.
At the end of the interview there, listeners didn't know, I actually burst into tears. How often have you heard
Nicola's not. I'm a teary one. I can tear up.
Yeah, I've seen Di tear up.
That makes me feel emotional. But Nicola, no. Tell us, what affected you in the Roger interview?
It was his thing about relationships and money and what's the most important thing. And then I got emotional, I guess, sort of recently I've had sort of an incident and I think sort of with the kind of facade and the money you can use money for good and you can use it for bad. And I think I've had an experience there when it wasn't used in the right way and I was kind of affected by that. And it just literally brought me to tears. But it's like, what's the most important thing in life? is relationships. So have as much money as you want, and that's great. But if you don't look after your relationship, you're not a rich person.
It's so true. And that affected you. So Roger Montgomery, who we've just interviewed in Reflection, Sam, he affected you too.
Yeah, because when he was describing that relationships are the most important and that's where your wealth is, I was just reflecting on how, for me, I've been working for myself for 11 years, and there's been a lot of financial insecurity that comes with that because, you know, you're in charge of kind of generating your own cash flow, and you don't have sick pay, and I don't have income protection insurance, and I don't have holiday pay, and I'm single, so I don't have anyone's financial support to rely on. Like, it's me, and at times it can feel a lot, and I can have moments where I go, God, how am I going to do this? And
Sam,
then I think,
I hear you.
I am the wealthiest person in the world because I have the best relationships, and it literally is what helps me calm myself down when I have those moments, because I think to myself, okay, Sam, you're feeling like you're not going to be able to pay your rent, but will you ever be homeless? Will you ever be destitute? In my case, no, because I have so many people that love me and that I love, who I know in an instant would help me out if I ever said, I can't pay my rent next week. Like, my wealth is in the connection that I have with the people that I love, and that's why when he talked about wealth in relationships, I was like, yes, that's like everything I believe.
It's putting everything, with both of you, it's putting everything in perspective, honestly, at the end of the day, just putting everything in perspective. What did he also talked about, people dying. It's like
you can't take it with you.
What can I do for you now? Just more time. Nothing. No super yachts. No houses. No nothing. Just more time to spend with the people I love. I guess I didn't get emotional. For me, because I'm about to go through a divorce, and for me it was educational. So what's amazing me right now with three women here who got what out of it. It's fascinating.
Well, let us know what you got out of it, because we certainly had to share
I've got
this.
two women in tears. Oh my God!
Roger
I've got to take them for a shams.
Roger has gone until for next month, but you brought me to tears. An insight from Sam, and we love that from us. So let us know what you think.
Absolutely.
And tune in. It's going to be a wild old
ride.
It
will be a wild
money.
Money.
We got to
Lofty party. It's a rich woman's world. Ciao, guys. Ciao.